Morning, everybody. Yeah, on Friday I woke up and I couldn't talk, and my wife rejoiced. You know, I always have had this strange kind of timbre to my voice. I always wanted to have James Earl Jones' voice, but now I have Vito Corleone's voice. So you listen to me for a while, maybe I'll listen to you later. And there's nothing wrong. I have no other symptoms. It's just my voice went away. I could hardly talk at all yesterday. And so I don't think it's a physical problem. I've been wondering, maybe it's a spiritual thing. So maybe it's something that I need to say today that is so important and so significant. There's kind of a spiritual conspiracy that doesn't want you to hear it. Or maybe what I'm going to say is so heretical that God is trying to protect you. I'll leave it to you. You decide. But I'll do my best, and what I would begin with is I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about this for a second. Do you consider yourself to be a successful person? Are you successful? Now, I realize that's a tricky question. We want to be, but the metrics on it are difficult, and it really depends on how we define success. And success for most of us begins with some striving, and we seek things like applause and achievement and accomplishments. And we seek to acquire things. And we measure our success by the things we accomplish and the things we achieve and the things that we acquire. But all of us in that process of striving realize that great theologian, Mick Jagger, was correct. We really can't find satisfaction. And part of the problem is, as we're seeking success, people are changing the rules. They're changing the rules in the middle of the game. They're moving the goalposts. What success means changes over time. And it morphs, and it's subjective. And that desire for more, even when we get to the point where we think we have achieved what we wanted, there's always more. There's always another hill to climb. It turns out that the measure we have for success is often a false summit. And so in the process of striving to achieve success, we struggle with disappointment. And discouragement. And even fight depression. And it's not our fault. It's part of our nature. We want to climb the ladder to success. We strive to survive. And the problem is, in this struggle, we wind up at a place of self-doubt and self-loathing. And self-hate. And the insidious thing about it is that when all is said and done, the only real reliable metric we have for measuring whether or not we are successful is simply to compare ourselves to others who are behind us or above us. And we get trapped in this comparison between ourselves and others. And that's the root. That's the root of our bigotry. It's the root of our prejudice. When we begin to say, well, at least I'm better than they are. And those people don't deserve what they have. And in that comparison that is a necessary part of climbing for success, we wind up judging others so that we can protect ourselves from our own insecurity and self-doubt. But maybe that's upside down. Maybe the reality is that our searching for these things is not wrong. It's just that we're living in a world that has been turned upside down. That we may be right side up, but the world is upside down. And the measure that I want to suggest today for us kind of understanding how to live right side up in an upside down world is a formula. And the formula is this: F is to S as T is to B. Failure is to success as trees are to books. Think about that for a moment. Because if it sounds familiar, it's rooted in this idea of some of the ridiculous things that Jesus of Nazareth said. And he said them over and over and over. He said things like, if you want to be my disciple, you have to actually take up your cross and follow me. He said, if you want to gain your life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life by trying to follow me, you will find it. He said things like, what good is it for a person to gain the whole world and lose their own soul? My prayer today is what my prayer is every Sunday. That the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in God's sight. And that God would use his word, spoken by his servant and anointed by his Spirit, today especially, to encourage us to live right side up in an upside down world. Now, if you were here last week or you watched online last week, you remember that I began to tell you a story last week. And it's what you might call a fish story. And what makes it an unusual fish story is not about a man who caught a fish. It's about a fish who caught a man. And that man's name was Jonah. The hero of the story, the main character of the story, was a man named Jonah ben Amittai. He lived about 2,800 years ago in the consolidated tribal state of Judah in the land of Israel, sometime between 793 and 752 BC, under the reign of Jeroboam II. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel were united in a land they called Judah, and Jonah was their prophet. Do you know what a prophet sounds like? Do you know what, let me ask it this way. Do you know what the love language of a prophet is? You probably do. You probably know what the love language of a prophet is. You just don't realize it. You see, my mom was a prophet. And my mom used to prophesy to me all the time. She would say, Dave, if you don't stop sitting so close to the television, you will go blind. If you don't eat your vegetables, you will not grow up big and strong. And my mother's favorite prophetic utterance, which she said multiple times to me, was she said, if you don't behave, I'm going to knock you so far into next week, you won't remember Tuesday. She literally told me that on a regular basis. It was the voice of a prophet. Jonah was a mother. And the reality is, the love language of a prophet is the love language of a mother. It is the love language of warning. I warn you to protect you. I warn you to save you. I warn you because I love you. And Jonah was a prophet of Yahweh. And when God told Jonah that he was to go to the land of the Assyrians, to the city of Nineveh, and speak his love language to them, he didn't do it. He hated the Assyrians, you see, and with good reason. Now, we don't know if Jonah saw the future of the tribes of Judah, but we know historically that in the year 722 BC, some 30 years after the life of Jonah and the reign of King Jeroboam, the Assyrians, the Ninevites, invaded the northern tribes of Israel, and they destroyed them. They wiped them out. They carried them into captivity, never to return. You may have heard of the lost tribes of Israel. They were lost because the Assyrians wiped them out. Now, we don't know if Jonah hated the Assyrians because he knew the future. Maybe he just hated them because they were evil. They were a terrorist state. They were a warrior nation. But when God said, I want you to speak your love language, I want you to speak a warning to the Assyrian people, Jonah said, not going to do it. In fact, instead of going 500 miles to the east to the city of Nineveh, he went to the port city of Joppa and sought to get on a boat that would take him 2,000 miles in the opposite direction to the city of Tarshish. No sooner had the ship set sail than God sent a great storm on the sea, and the ship was in danger of sinking. Now, if you just look at the evaluation of the behavior of the prophet Jonah, you would say he is a terrible prophet. He is a failure as a prophet. His world was turned upside down. And I think most of us are familiar with that experience, whether it is because of decisions that we have made or storms that blow into our lives. I think we are all familiar with failure. And we are familiar with the struggle that comes because of poor decisions. This is, in fact, an invitation to do something amazing. It is what I call, it is the invitation to descend into greatness. You see, if we are living in an upside-down world, we don't ascend to greatness, we descend into it. And in the story of Jonah, we are reminded of the elements of that descent. And today I want to share with you three things. Three things about what it means to descend into greatness. What it means to descend to find satisfaction and serenity and lasting success. And the first element, or the first step, is to express humility. Now, humility can be a tricky thing because humility can be faked. We can have false modesty about things when we really sort of have a faux humility, where it's like, oh, this old rag, oh, that really wasn't my best effort. When we're saying, I really wasn't my best, praise me, applaud for me. We're familiar with it. We're familiar with how humility can be mutated. But when you see genuine, authentic humility, you know it. Because genuine humility is powerful. A number of years ago, a Harvard professor was studying the culture of successful businesses. His name was Jim Collins. And Jim Collins did an exhaustive study of what were, according to their profitability, the most successful organizations and corporations in the world. And he and his team gathered information about what made these companies successful and what made their leaders good leaders. And they came up with a measure of what they called 4 levels of successful leadership. And a level 4 leader was often the person who was leading a very successful organization or company. And they were people of great passion, people of great integrity, people of great commitment and drive and vision and organization. They were great at leading companies. But the amazing thing was that Collins and his team found that there were a handful of leaders who weren't just good, they were actually great. And not only did they produce and lead successful companies, they led long-lasting successful companies. They took their study and they wrote it in a book, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. It's called Good to Great. And what they found was the unique attribute of what they called level 5 leaders was one thing. It was humility. The great leaders had the power to lead from a place of true humility. This is what Collins says about these level 5 leaders. Level 5 leaders are a study in duality, he says. Modest and willful, humble and fearless. Level 5 leaders display a compelling modesty, are self-effacing and understated. I like this. Level 5 leaders look out the window to attribute success to factors other than themselves. But when things go poorly, however, they look in the mirror and blame themselves, taking full responsibility. I really like the quote that Harry Truman gave. He said, "You can accomplish anything in life, provided that you do not mind who gets the credit." Another leadership consultant named Patrick Lencioni has what I consider to be the most precise definition of humility I've ever seen. He says, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. We know it when we see it. When we see true humility, we understand that there is a power there. And the first step on the descent into greatness is to express humility. And we avoid the insincerity of false humility by giving and serving and caring. Now, you can give and you can serve and you can care from a place of abundance, but true humility gives sacrificially, cares sacrificially, serves sacrificially, and it's the purifier. It is the antidote to this idea of comparison. Sincere sacrificial humility is transparent in its character. We get a glimpse of it in the story of Jonah. The first time that Jonah shows us this sacrificial humility is in Jonah Chapter 1, in the middle of the storm, when the Phoenician sailors realize that Jonah is a prophet of Yahweh. They ask him, "Tell us what to do." And Jonah, in an act of completely sacrificial humility, says, "Pick me up and throw me overboard. Because when you do, the sea will grow calm, because this storm is my fault." The power of a humble spirit is the power to manifest and amplify my care and my service and my generosity, because it doesn't come strictly from a place of abundance. It comes as I share from my base of need and my own lack. I do my best and I make a sacrifice. It's a powerful thing to see. But the second element in this descent into greatness requires that we do something that we do here at Riverbend really well. It is embrace brokenness. To embrace brokenness is to be transparent, it's to be honest, it's to be authentic about our faults and our failures and our inadequacies. It is that courageous idea that we can look in the mirror and see ourselves as we really are. And we can embrace that idea that we're not perfect, that we're flawed. And it contributes to dismantling this sense of superiority or this sense of comparison, because we're all in the same boat. We're all broken. We are all inadequate. We are all imperfect. If there is anything, there are many things that I love about Riverbend, about the identity of this community, it's that. One of the things that I cherish the most is that we are fearless in our willingness to embrace our own brokenness. Unapologetically, we admit to each other that we need, that we cannot get by on our own. It is the integrity of the fabric of this community. But it's dangerous. It's dangerous. You see, it's risky. It's not just risky to admit that I have needs. In fact, that's kind of easy. I think it becomes obvious, isn't it? I mean, we very rarely meet perfect people. So imperfection is really just sort of stating the obvious, but it becomes dangerous in a community when we begin to flaunt our brokenness. When we begin to elevate brokenness to a holy thing, when we forget that brokenness is failure. It means we failed. It means that because of our inadequacies, because of our flaws, because of our selfishness and our self-righteousness, we have potentially wounded others. We can never forget. The brokenness is a weight. It is something that we acknowledge and something that we embrace. But we do so very carefully. In the second chapter of Jonah, the whole chapter is really a prayer that Jonah prays. It says, while he was in the intestines of the fish. And it is a man coming to terms with his own brokenness. I'm reading from Eugene Peterson's paraphrase called The Message. This is Jonah Chapter 2. Then Jonah prayed to his God from the belly of the fish. He prayed in trouble, deep trouble. I prayed to God. He answered me. From the belly of the grave, I cried, help. You heard my cry. You threw me into ocean's depths, into a watery grave with ocean waves, ocean breakers crashing over me. I said, I've been thrown away, thrown out of your sight. I'll never again lay eyes on your holy temple. Ocean gripped me by the throat. The ancient abyss grabbed me and held me tight. My head was all tangled in seaweed at the bottom of the sea where the mountains take root. I was as far down as a body can go, and the gates were slamming shut behind me forever. You pulled me up from that grave alive, oh God, my God. When my life was slipping away, I remembered God, and my prayer got through to you, made it all the way to your holy temple. Those who worship hollow gods, God frauds, walk away from their only true love. But I'm worshiping you, God, calling out to you in thanksgiving. And I'll do what I promised I'd do. Salvation belongs to God. Now it's interesting in that prayer, the thing that Jonah doesn't say. You ever wonder, have you reached the bottom? Is the struggle that you're in the intestines of the great fish? I think we only access that point by saying 3 words. Because the thing that protects us from that self-indulgent flaunting of our brokenness, that boasting in our inadequacies where we can use it as an excuse to say, well, I failed, but everybody does. Everybody messes up. Nobody's perfect. That's not embracing our brokenness. We embrace our brokenness when we're willing to say 3 simple words. I was wrong. When we recognize that our brokenness is not someone else's fault. There's no one else to blame, not our nature, not our environment, not our culture, not our God, that we own, we embrace, we recognize, I was wrong. Unfortunately, Jonah never gets there. Jonah never gets to that place. You see, the story of Jonah is a warning. It's a polemic. It's a story not about what Jonah did or didn't do. It's a story for the people of God to see how not to behave. And Jonah, even though he is in the belly of the fish, even though he is recognizing his helplessness, he never owns it. And he never gets to the 3rd place. Because the 3rd place is the experience of surrender. It's rare. I can tell you, I'm not there. I have moments when I experience that because sometimes we are millennials and we just say whatever, and we give up instead of giving over, and we have apathy that says I don't care anymore. That's not surrender. The experience of surrender is the experience of contentment, of peace, of rest, of serenity, of true success, of true satisfaction. It's very, very rare. I probably have known less than a handful of people in my entire life who dwell there. I've seen people in the final days and hours of their life find it. I've seen people in the depth of great sorrow and great helplessness cling to it. But I've very rarely seen anyone who lives in it. That's why the contemplative tradition in Christianity is a model of divesting yourself of all of these things, of making a vow of celibacy and poverty so that you can enter into a place where you have no entanglements, where you surrender yourself to the presence of God. It's an amazing thing to get to, but for most of us, it is a lifelong pursuit. It was for the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul struggled. I mean, he said often that he had not attained it yet. He repeated the phrase, I must decrease so he can increase. In Philippians chapter 1, he says, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." He realizes that in this life, he is simply pursuing that surrender. In Philippians chapter 3, he talks about that struggle. And he says, "I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection, and I want to engage with him in his suffering, so that somehow, I can attain to the resurrection of the dead." Because what this is a resurrected life. To live a life that transcends this life. It is to enter into a place of complete transformation. Jonah never gets there. And what we will see in the next couple of weeks is how we make our way through the world of almost experiencing this. What it looks like in our lives as we pursue that experience of surrender, as we taste it and get close to it. What are the things that draw us down into it? You know, a lot of people, and it's interesting that this is where Jonah chapter 2 ends. And I think it's poetic that Jonah chapter 2 ends with the description that God told the fish to vomit Jonah onto the shore. "I'm done with you." If you haven't learned by being in the intestines of a sea creature to surrender to me, I'm not sure you ever will. And he vomits him onto the shore. Now, the cynics among us ask the question, did this really take place? How is this possible that a man was swallowed by a fish and lived? And a lot of theologians, even a lot of scientists, try to suggest how it was possible that Jonah, a human being, was inside of the digestive tract of a sea creature for 3 days and 3 nights and somehow survived. My suggestion is that he didn't. I believe Jonah died. Now, you can say, well, what evidence do you have of that? Well, there's this guy named Jesus who said, "I will do what Jonah did." Because just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And what Jesus was saying is the miracle of the resurrection was what Jonah was invited to experience. You see, the whole thing is a miracle. I mean, you're stepping out of the scientific explanation just by the fact that a man fell off of a boat and hit a fish. I mean, are any of you fishermen? You know the work that you go through just to find a fish, maybe in a river or a lake? How about in the middle of the ocean? Just in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Have you ever been out at sea where you can't even see land? All you see in every direction is an endless horizon of water? You're going to tell me that it wasn't a miracle that he fell off the boat and a fish found him? The miracle started there. It's a minor miracle if he was resurrected. He didn't have to live. You could say this was a near-death experience. This was a post-traumatic reflection of what he experienced in death. But the reality is, the point of Jonah chapter 2 is that this process is a miraculous process. It is not a human process. It is not a process that we can will ourselves into. This is miracle territory. Because everything in us causes us to strive and to climb for success. And we live in a world that is completely upside down. But to live right side up in an upside down world, I would suggest that we see the balance of this equation. That failure is as necessary for success as trees are for books. How do you get a book from a beautiful tree? It has to be cut down. It has to be taken to a mill and ground into pulp. And then when it's ground into pulp, it is processed and pressed and formed into paper. And on that paper is written the book. And failure is as necessary to success as trees are to books. Because God wants to write his word on us, and he can only do it if we express humility and embrace our brokenness and experience surrender. We live in an upside down world. But to live right side up in an upside down world means that we don't ascend into greatness. We descend into it. And it is a work of surrendering our will to God. So, I apologize for my voice today, although it held up better than I thought it would. My wife will be disappointed, but I'm glad we got through this. But I leave you with the question we began with. Do you consider yourself to be a successful person?